So I want to explain really briefly why perception is so important in my life day to day, and why it's really important if you are watching my videos, looking at my stuff, seeing whether you think it's relevant, helpful, whatever, whatever your thoughts. I want to explain why perception, firstly, very basically what it is, and secondly, why it is so important that you're aware of where I'm coming from and how that fits in with your experience. Okay, now perception. Effectively, perception is how we see things. It's how I view the world, how you view the world. So it starts really young. It starts when we're born. So our perception is shaped by the colour of our skin, our gender, where we grow up, what the social norms are, what our family situation is. Do we have money? Do we not have money? What are our family's attitudes to money? What are our family's attitudes to other things? What are our friends' attitudes? What are the things that are considered normal in the society that we are in? And what happens is, as we have experiences, then those experiences, our brain kind of makes sense of them. And the way that it makes sense of them is based on how we react to them, but also what other reactions are, external things. And then how we react to those circumstances will then shape, potentially, how we then go on to react to other things. And we have opinions that are formed, beliefs that are formed. But the most important thing to remember here is that everybody thinks differently. There is not one person that will think the same as you think, the same as I think. Because we have all been raised differently, had different experiences, how we've processed those experiences are different. And so, in some ways, I might be stating the obvious, because we all know that people think differently. This is why we have different political affiliations. This is why we like one car and we don't like another car. We like one TV show, we don't like another TV show. Like, everything kind of gets interwoven into this. Where it's really important, well, actually, there's a lot of reasons why it's really important in my day-to-day. And there are so many reasons why it's important. I'm not even going to start going through it at this point, but I'll be picking all of these and kind of talking about them in different forms and posts and videos. So I wanted to give 2 examples today which relate to my perception and the way that I think of things, and why I will keep talking about it all the time, and why I've already started talking about it. Why I've already said, look, I want to talk about mental health, I want to talk about managing chronic depression, and I'm going to do that from this perspective of somebody that's sober. Okay? This is really important to me, because if you're going to listen and take note of what I say, and potentially what I say may resonate with you, then it's really important for me that you understand where I'm coming from, which is why I'm saying I'm doing this as a sober person. I may mention my ADHD. I may mention other things. Because I know in the past, sometimes I have listened to people, taken advice from people, professionals, that in some circumstances absolutely know what they're talking about. But in other circumstances, it's just not relevant to me. But I've listened to those people because I may think that they know best, or I may think that I may not have even realised that they are coming from a completely different playing field, that they look at things completely different. So I'm going to give you 2 examples. The first one is basically at a point where I was trying to cut down my drinking. I went to a drinking charity, an addiction charity. And I went to this charity and I sat down with someone, and basically they had the main piece of advice that they had for me was to cut down my drinking, and then move to stopping drinking was to, if I had to have a drink, to start later. So let's say I started drinking at 5:30 p.m. Their advice was to start drinking at 6 p.m. and then gradually move it back. Their reasoning was that if I started drinking later, I would drink less. And then over time, I would reduce the level of my drinking. You may have noticed something in my tone of voice. This is because that is a ridiculously stupid thing to say to somebody who has a problem with overdrinking. The thing about overdrinking is that once you start drinking, you don't have an off button if you're like me. Okay? I don't have an off button. So once I started drinking, I didn't want to stop drinking. And if I had a certain period of time where I needed to go to bed because of what I had to do the next day, by pushing the time back and saying, well, if you start later, then you'll just drink less. No, I didn't drink less. I drank more quickly when I did start drinking to catch up to where I wanted to be in terms of what state I wanted to reach. Not going to go into that in too much depth at this point. Now the person, let's bring this back to perspective and let me explain what I mean. The person that gave me this advice was well-meaning, was doing the best that they could, but the reality was they had never been addicted to anything. So their advice, in my experience, was not as valuable as somebody who had been through having a head that wanted you to keep drinking regardless of the consequences. They didn't understand what it was like. So the advice was pointless, ridiculous, stupid, in my humble opinion. Okay? But because this person was a professional, I listened to them and I tried it. It didn't work. Now, if you are somebody watching this who is sober, or he's going through that at the moment, you will get what I'm saying because you have some shared lived experience with me. All right? So you will understand that. So this is where understanding my perspective and relating it to your perspective and your experiences can be really helpful. I'm going to give you a second example. I think I've mentioned briefly in different places that effectively I'm late diagnosed, as in self-diagnosed ADHD. The only reason that I knew that this was a possibility was because it was mentioned to me last summer that somebody thought that I may have ADHD. This was someone who knew what they were talking about. And then over the year, through various things, I have come to the conclusion that yes, I do have ADHD. So I didn't find out that I was neurodivergent until the age of 53. I had to think then for a moment. Not knowing that, not realising that, has had a massive impact on my life. So let's look at how perspective is relevant in that situation. For a really long time, I was trying to improve. So I was trying to improve my time management, how I achieved things, what I was doing. So I would be looking at a lot of the advice that's out there. I'd be looking at people who got up at 5 a.m. And did all this stuff at the beginning of the day, and you eat right and you exercise and you do and you do this every single day and you make yourself do it, and it's willpower, and you can achieve things. I briefly have looked at Atomic Habits, and I'm not slagging anybody off here, can I just make that clear? what I'm trying to point out is that a lot of the advice out there, a lot of the big sellers, the books, the motivational speakers, these are people whose brain works differently to mine. But I didn't realise that. So I'm trying to follow the advice of people whose brain works in a completely different fashion, who are able to start something and maintain that and create a habit. This is not necessarily what I am able to do. So I'm kind of finding my way around my ADHD at the moment, but I'm starting to check where I'm getting my advice from. Who am I listening to? And I have to weigh up what I'm reading, what the perspective or the bias of the person is that I'm listening to, and whether that is something that is doable for me, taking my ADHD into account. Now, the negative side of me trying for a really long time to follow these processes and ways of doing things was that when I couldn't, that fed into the negative self-talk that I had in my head, which is not good for my mental health. It's not good generally, is it? You know, if you're trying to do something and you can't do it, and you can't work out why you can't do it, then if your brain is used to thinking a certain way, which is blaming yourself and going down a kind of a critical thinking pattern, then you might be trying to do things that you are never going to be able to do because you're just not wired that way. Or because you have other commitments, you know. You may be a full-time carer. You may be trying to juggle so many different things in your life that trying to do things in a certain way just is not an option for you. But you may not realise that. I didn't realise that. So there's 2 examples today of why being aware of why you think the way that you do, whether that is social, experiences when you're growing up, whether that's the way that your brain is wired, all these things come into account. And this is why perception is so important. And it can be harnessed in really good ways. But for today, all I wanted to do was just kind of start giving you an insight into why this is something that I will keep mentioning again and again and again. Because me being aware of my perception and why I think the way that I do, and being aware as much as possible of other people's perceptions and where they're coming from, is an integral part of how I manage my mental health.